Are you guys ever going about your life in peace and all of a sudden that memory of something really embarrassing you said or did many years ago pops up in your head randomly as an intrusive thought, and then you just cringe? Like, oh my God, that hurts me in my soul that happened. I had that the other day when I was showering, and I remembered something that I did while I was a waitress. And then it made me realize how many autistic moments I had working as a waitress. And I thought it might be fun to come on here and share those moments with you guys, just so we could laugh at it together, or it could generate some interesting conversations. Either way, today's video is going to be a little bit more casual, a little bit more of just me telling stories rather than talking about a specific topic. So I remember that first week that I was learning about how to be a server, I was taught so many rules. You have to greet your table within the first 3 minutes of them being sat. I remember them even telling me like a time frame of like every 10 minutes you have to check on your table to see if they're doing okay and if they need anything. And I took these times very, very literally and so freaking seriously, because I was so scared to mess up. Because nothing to me is smooth when it comes to jobs, let alone socializing with people. And so when they gave me very specific advice, I clung onto it so hard. Like, okay, I greet them within the first 3 minutes. I have to lay the napkins down. I have to lay out all the waters. And then I have to like get their order in by like 5 minutes within them sitting down. I would calculate all of this when I had multiple tables sat at once and things like that. And then I would panic because I'm like, how am I supposed to get to these 2 tables within the first 3 minutes if I'm still greeting this first table because they all got sat at the same time? You see where I'm going with this, right? Like, I took it way too literally. In reality, they're just giving you a general timeline of when they're sat, give them a little time to get settled and then greet them. They're not literally telling you, greet them within the first 3 minutes or something bad's gonna happen. But for some reason, that's genuinely what I thought and what I felt like, especially the first few months of me working. Was just taking that direction way too literally. And here's where the actual social faux pas is. I was unaware that I was making social faux pas. I was unaware that I was taking it way too literally until there was this one table one time during a shift where I greeted them at the proper time. I would check in on them during the proper intervals. And then I remember when I circled back around to them like the 5th time to be like, hey, are you guys doing okay? Do you need anything? The girl looked at me with such a nasty face and she was like, we're fine. And then I was just like, oh, okay. And then I went back to like the little waiters area where we do all the drinks and enter the food in the POS and things like that. And I was just like thinking about that interaction. I'm trying to interpret her facial expressions and things like that. And I was like, she seemed upset with me, but I don't know why, because I was being a good waiter. I was like checking in on them. I was making sure they had everything. And then I finally realized that she was upset with me or annoyed with me because they were doing fine, but I would still check in on them anyways, instead of reading the room, I guess. And then in turn, I would interrupt their conversation, or I ended up being more of a nuisance and a bother than being helpful, which was what I was intending. And that's when I realized that these types of rules that my manager and my trainers gave me is supposed to be taken with a grain of salt. That's the thing though. Us autistics, we don't know that these social rules and social contracts, it requires a lot of intuition and plasticity, if that makes sense. It's not to be followed very literally. Like, you have to be able to treat every situation as its own and be able to react appropriately every time. And that was really difficult for me. And I didn't realize that I messed up because I was just simply following the rules, right? And that's when I learned the lesson of, Irene, you have to like observe every table, observe how they're interacting, and make sure that if a table looks like everything is taken care of, all the waters are filled up, all their drinks are filled up, their food is still being eaten, there's not a bunch of like plates being left there, and they're not just like sitting there staring off into the distance. If they're all like having conversation and they look like they're in the middle of something, perhaps don't check in on them every 10 minutes to ask if they need anything. Or if you're unsure, figure out whether or not it would be better for them to flag you down for you to come check on them, or for you to check in on them if you're unsure. I had to painfully figure out these types of things that came naturally to other non-autistic servers through messing up a lot and having to reflect on it afterwards and being like, okay, I'm taking mental notes. If someone makes these certain facial expressions or hand gestures or their body language looks a certain way, that means don't check in on them. Another rule that I took way too literally is, I think my manager told me when I was first getting trained that if someone looked under the age of like 40 and they were ordering alcohol, to card them. Even if they look like adults, if they look under 40, don't take me for word on the age. It was something about like 40, 50, 30 years old or whatever. But like, if they looked under that, then you have to ask for their ID and check if they're of age and all of that kind of stuff. And I took that way too literally, because after my manager told me that, every single time any of my tables ordered drinks, and they were clearly adults, but because I'm looking at them and I'm like, they look like they're under 40, I would ask for their ID. And then I remember every single time the table will laugh, and then they would look so amused, so entertained, and I would consistently get this feedback of like, oh my God, I haven't been carded in so many years. Like, this is a compliment, And then I just kind of got this vibe that there was this inside joke that was very amusing that I wasn't really understanding, because at the time I was just like, I'm literally just following my manager's instructions. Another reason why I took these rules so literally is because my manager told me that there's these secret shoppers that would come in every now and then, and we wouldn't know that they're secret shoppers, but they're actually observing how competent we are at work and things like that. I also took that way too literally, and I was just like scared all the time that I would break a rule and then some secret shopper would catch me and then, get me in trouble and things like that. So for me, I'm like, this is the rule. I have to follow it every time. This is how it has to be unless I want to get in trouble. An example of me carding someone that was so obviously an adult was like this one time, this man at the table ordered a beer, and he had a beard, and he obviously looked in his 30s or maybe even 40s, but because he looked younger than that age that my manager gave me, I carded him. He looked at me like, are you serious? Like, you really need to card me? And then I remember just having another one of those introspective moments after of like replaying that interaction, being like, why did he have that reaction when I asked for his card? And then I thought to myself, maybe if someone does look above 21, perhaps you don't have to card them. Like, it's not that serious, Irene. And I didn't really integrate that until after having multiple of those reactions to me carding obviously of age people. Yeah. Another thing that I really struggled with as an undiagnosed autistic waiter is the social dynamics and how much of a role that played within the job itself in terms of you and your coworkers. So for me, I always just thought like a job is a job. You show up, you do your job, you go home. You're just cordial with your coworkers and you respect each other. You aren't a burden to each other. Like, that's just what jobs are, right? And I think working as a waiter was my first time seeing that social dynamics do play a really, really prominent role in an adult's job. There would be so many times where I would walk into my shift and I would go straight to the front to see what section I got. In the restaurant, there are sections that waiters will want to have because it's better. It attracts a certain type of person because, let's say, people who are more likely to tip want to sit in booths. And if it's a bigger group of people sitting at a booth, you're more likely to get better tips because the check is higher and things like that. And so I went to go check my section. My section is good. I would go to the back and prepare for my shift and things like that, come out to the front and realize that my section got switched with another waiter that was a lot more socially connected with everyone. And it's not because the manager okayed it necessarily. It was because that waiter was friends with the host and friends with everyone. And she was like, I like that section that Irene has because it's better. So I want us to switch. And then the host would just kind of do it for her without telling me or the manager or anything. And there's no conversation about it. And then all of a sudden I spend the rest of the night with a really crappy section. And then this other girl has my section just because she's friends with the other people, you know, and hangs out with them outside of work. And there would even be times where I would lose my section altogether, and then my section would go to someone else, and then they would earn all the tips of that section. And then I'm just left as a floater, basically, like running everyone else's food and no tips for the night, just because I wasn't friends with everyone at work, you know? And that's another thing that took me a really long time to realize, is that just because I'm cordial with everyone at work doesn't mean I'm friends with them. And I couldn't understand the concept of like being besties with your coworkers and like hanging out and almost being like family outside of work, and then also having to see each other at work and be professional. Like I didn't know how to balance that, and that bit me in the butt in so many ways, like objectively, like losing out on money. And it really does take a toll on you when you see so many people breaking certain rules and not getting in trouble for it, because as an autistic person observing that, you almost like non-verbally deduct, oh, I guess this rule isn't as important. And so you think it's okay for you to break those rules because I guess no one cares. But then you go to break those rules and then immediately you get in trouble. And then you have to now go through that cognitive dissonance of like, but they're not getting in trouble. Like, why am I getting in trouble? And then you look like a Debbie Downer because you're kind of like that kid that's like, why I get in trouble and no other kid get in trouble? It's just like a lose-lose situation at that point. I didn't realize until years later that there's this like invisible social contract that gets you so many invisible benefits if you sign on the dotted line and you play into it. I didn't know that existed, let alone know how to play into that social contract. I still don't know. Some autistic people can really observe it and figure it out and crack the code with much effort, right? But for me, like, even if I put so much effort into trying to understand it and decode it, I still couldn't, let alone like being able to actually participate. Like, that's another thing. I just have such a hard time masking effectively. This is going to be different for all different types of autistics, but I notice more or less some autistics are a lot more effective at masking than others. Some are in the middle. I feel like I just kind of go in the middle. Like, I can put on a certain type of mask and be presentable, but that only gets me so far because I have a more flat affect. So even when I try to sound happy and excited, it kind of just comes across as sarcasm. And I wish it wasn't like that. Like, I wish I could be bubbly and excitable and things like that, but that's just not really, I don't know if I'm even capable of that, you know? Another way that these social contracts bit me in the butt is there's this rule that we have to run each other's food because there weren't any runners at our restaurant. And so the rule is if there's a tray of food sitting out on, underneath those lamps, you have to go run it. It doesn't matter if it's your table, because at the end of the day, we're all running each other's food. That way the food is fresh when it gets to the tables. I help scratch your back if you help scratch my back, and that's how we make this whole thing work. It wasn't until like a year in where people started to realize more and more, Irene is different. She's not something we like. We don't feel comfortable around her. She's not signing this social contract, where I started to really be affected and impacted by people selectively alienating me and not helping me. What would end up happening during my shifts is I will do everything as I was taught. I would run people's food, all of that kind of stuff. And then I would notice, let's say it's like really busy, right? I would notice every time I would go into the back, my food was just laying there in its tray, cold. And then there would be other waiters on the shift with me just standing there talking. And I would just be like making the mental calculations in my head. And I'm like, so they're free right now, but they're actively choosing to not run my tray of food, even though I'm literally busting my ass running everyone's food if I got to their tray first. This is where the autism comes in, is like you have to put so much effort into interpreting these social things. This is the difference between what is a high masking autistic social deficit versus how a non-autistic person would be able to handle the situation. A non-autistic person would probably only need the first or maybe even second time to realize, oh, y'all don't like me, so y'all are purposefully not running my food, leaving me in the dust, and playing me for a fool. And that person will not only know that and catch on to it immediately, but they'll know exactly how they need to respond, whether that's directly confronting the people. Something I've seen non-autistic people do that I just genuinely am so bamboozled by and don't know how it works is when people could casually confront others and be authoritative without rubbing others the wrong way. My partner, who's non-autistic, is so good at this. I imagine if he was in that position, he would be like, yo, you guys aren't running my food. What the hell? Like, you guys want me to stop running your food? And then he'll be able to basically banter about it so that everyone could kind of laugh and be like, oh, you're cool, without coming across like an asshole. But at the same time, enough of an asshole where people are like, oh, we can't just get away with like not running his food because I don't know how to explain it, but I don't know how to do that. And not only that, it takes me a long time to realize that that's happening. It's not even that I realized it, it's that I noticed a pattern is what it starts off as. So initially, for the first few weeks, I might realize, oh, work has been a lot harder lately. I keep running food and it's just endless. I might notice the pattern of, well, I don't know why my table has been consistently getting cold food or things like that. Later on, I might catch on like, oh, why is my tray of food always just sitting in the back getting cold? And then I'll start to notice even more months later, like, oh, my food is being consistently left out in the cold and no one is running it. And I see my coworkers are not busy, they're talking to each other. And I start to put the pieces together like, oh my gosh, they're literally doing this on purpose. And then I have to ruminate on why, because I don't understand. You see what I'm saying? Like, we have to figure out the patterns first and remember it, and then begin to piece things together slowly. Again, what would have taken a non-autistic person maybe 2 times of noticing to realize what's happening and to respond to it would take me 6 months, and then I still may not know how to respond properly to it. And I basically came to the conclusion of like, just because I don't have a certain relationship with them, they're all actively, I don't know if they talked about it. I don't know if this is just like a nonverbal thing that's like written in their invisible social contract. I don't know what it is. But for some reason, they all collectively decided that they're not going to help me out and that I was basically disposable in so many different ways. If my girl wanted a section and Irene had it, I'm going to kick Irene out and give that section to her. If Irene's food is laying there, we don't care. We're just going to let it grow cold. That's her problem. You know? And the same thing would happen with dishes, because the rule is you're constantly going in a circle. Greet your table, go get the drinks, drop them off, go to the back, run the dishes, grab the tray of food, go run the food. But I realized every time I would go back to do the dishes, no one would touch them. It was basically like me doing it every single time. And it's almost like they knew that I did everything and took advantage of it. And they felt comfortable taking advantage of it because they didn't care if I was being overworked or negatively affected. That's the thing about neurotypicals that I don't understand, or non-autistics. When we're at a job, I don't care if I don't like you or don't get along with you. We're at a job. If I'm supposed to help you out and it's an objective rule, I'm gonna do it. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to be a worse coworker to you or less helpful to you or be comfortable walking all over you just because I wouldn't hang out with you outside of work. Another thing that I didn't understand about those types of social relationships and things like that at work was when my coworkers would sleep with each other or sleep with the customers. This would confuse me because I'm just like, why are you gonna bring that mess to work? One time I had this coworker that literally slept with multiple of our regulars and at least one of our coworkers. I had this other coworker that slept with one of our other coworkers that was in a long-term relationship, and she was also in a relationship. Or another time I had a coworker who was like pretty much underage and was sleeping with the manager, who was very much so like in his 30s. And I would see these things happening and I'm just like, how are you guys managing this? But yeah, I kind of just wanted to end the video with some social observations I made in the 5 years that I worked in the food industry. One thing I noticed consistently is that I get along better with closers. I don't know what the psychology is behind people who are drawn to closing shifts, but I consistently feel drawn to being a closer and want to work with other closers because closers tend to be a lot more chill, but at the same time competent with their job. Because we show up, we do our job, and we just want to close it down. We just want to be so efficient that closing is so swift, so quick, and we could just get out of the restaurant or the coffee shop as early as we can and just like go home. For example, when I would go in for my closing shifts, as we're already working, the closers are already like doing the cleaning things we have to do at the end of the shift when everything's closed down. That's something that you don't even have to communicate about. And that's what I loved about those types of interactions. That's a social contract I can get with. That's a social contract I understand without even having to talk about it. When I see everyone else already cleaning up and doing their shit before the shit has to be done, I'm like, bet. I'm closing down my section little by little. I'm doing all the cleaning on my end too. Like, we're all just in it together. I've worked a couple shifts opening at the restaurant and also at the coffee shop, and openers are just not the same. It's not the same breed, I swear. Openers come in, they're yawning, they're tired, they're lazy, they're slower. They just want to go in and get the bare minimum done and leave. Like, they don't have to clean anything up. They just come in and leave. Whereas closers are like, as soon as they clock in, they're like, okay. We almost like, there's been so many times where we rally together and we're like, we close at 10 p.m. today. We're gonna be out by 10:05. That's how this shift is gonna be. This is how smooth the closing is gonna be. So y'all better be on your shit today, because I don't want to stay another 30 minutes or an hour cleaning up. And that's a language I understand. I want to go home and I want to just like watch my comfort shows and potato out for the rest of the night. Like, I'm not trying to be here longer than I have to be. Another fun thing is when we would start to get ready for closing and there would be still customers in the restaurant or coffee shop and they're just like kind of refusing to leave. Closers don't care. We don't care about customer service. Like, even the managers or the shift lead, they'll just immediately turn on music so loud and like turn off the lights just to give that nonverbal cue of like, you guys gotta leave now. We're done. We're closed. Bye. So that would be always so funny. It's just like the zero fucks that we give of the customers as soon as our closing time hits from like 9:59 to like 10. It's like immediate music blasting. Our headphones are in. We're closing. We're locking the doors. We're taking the trash out. And that's something that I've always felt really amused by because it's something that I understood. Those moments where you feel collectively in tune with everyone else around you without having to directly interact. I mean, if that's what regular non-autistic people feel all the time, I guess I can understand how much I'm missing out on as an autistic person, because that feels good. It feels good to know what's going on and to be connected to it and to be interacting with it. Another social observation that I've made is that as an autistic person working in the food industry, our customer service may not be at the tippiest, toppest shape in a sense where we could smile through unreasonable customers. If anything, I feel like we're the types of people that will be the first one to check an unreasonable customer, not because we're malicious or we're negative, but because it literally doesn't make sense. Like, there's been so many times where a customer will be so unreasonable towards me. I don't understand the whole ideology of like, customers are always right. One time I was in the section where I was making the pickup coffees where people order online and then I set them out in alphabetical order. And so I was like in the zone, right? Pumping out drinks. And I remember this girl walks in and she just sits there on her phone for like 15 minutes, which is a long time to just be sitting there. And then eventually, as I was making the coffee, she comes up to me and she was like, my coffee was sitting here the whole time and you didn't tell me. And I was like, what? All these drinks have your name on it and have your order on it. You are totally capable of coming in, looking for your coffee to see if your name is there and just pick it up and leave. That's the process. That's what was going through my mind, right? The process is so streamlined and makes so much sense. her missing out on her drink is literally her fault. And just her attitude was so bad on top of it. On top of that, tickets are coming in ringing, right? And I'm like missing out on them because now I have to deal with this customer. I've gotten in trouble so many times when these things happen. Like, I swear, I don't usually have anger problems, but when it comes to unreasonable people, just like straight up unreasonable and it makes no sense, that's when my autistic sense of justice really comes out. And I literally looked at her and I'm like, all of these cups have your names on it. You just had to come in and look for your name and get your drink. Like, that's not my job to literally go and call out all these different 20 drinks to customers who may not even be here just to see if they're here. And then she was like, can I speak to your manager? And I was like, yeah, you can. And then she was like, well, are you gonna go get her? And I was like, no, if you wanna go speak to her, you could go find her, but I have to make these drinks. So bye, I guess we're done here. And oh my God, I swear, reflecting on these stories makes me realize how much of my peace has been protected since not working and having to interact with people, because I was a menace back when I had to just interact with people every day. Oh my God, my spoons were so freaking low. Now, because I work from home and I work for myself, I could like have more bandwidth for people like that. And bless my manager, because she was so understanding. So in these moments, my manager would like placate these types of customers. This would happen, you know, every now and then, like once every few months, right? But in these moments, my manager will pull me to the back and she'll be like, so Irene, what happened there? Is there anything you could have done better, Irene? And I would be like, yeah, there's a lot of things I could have done better. I know I didn't handle it well, but that's something I actively chose because I feel like the customer didn't deserve for me to be nice to them because they were being really rude and unreasonable. And then my manager would be so lost during these moments. She'd be like, well, at least you're self-aware that you're not being good in those moments and you are making a mistake. And then she would think about it and she was like, but you're actively making that choice. And I'm like, yep, I know I was wrong. I know that wasn't something I'm supposed to do, but I just didn't want to do the other thing, the other option, which was to be nice and placate them because they didn't deserve it. She was so good. She's a Sagittarius, so she knows how to talk to people. Instead of just telling me like, you have to be nice to the customers, blah, 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 she was like, I would love for you to just challenge yourself, Irene. If you're upset with them, if they're being unreasonable, fine. Just challenge yourself to be nice to them anyways. And I'm like, yeah, I could see that. I'm okay with that. The way you worded it, like, that makes sense. Oh my gosh, other stories of crazy customers. There would be this one lady at the coffee shop that we all knew her. She was a regular and she wanted her drink the exact same way every time. And she was so picky. And here's the kicker. She only wanted specific baristas to make her drink and it made no sense. And it almost felt like bullying, to be honest, because every time she would come in and she would see a new barista, she would like test them out to see if they would be one of her chosen ones. She would make it a whole ordeal. She'll take a sip and then she'll be like, nah, not good enough. And then she'll ask the manager to come make her coffee for her. And she only basically let managers make her drink. And I feel like it's some sort of class thing. She liked feeling like only managers took care of her and were capable of it. That rubbed me the wrong way. I never made her drink. And that was like my choice. Even if she liked my drink and I was one of her chosen ones, I didn't want that. I don't want to enable someone to do those kind of things and bully baristas in that sort of way, because she genuinely made my coworkers feel like shit for no reason. Everyone would placate her because that's what you're supposed to do in the service industry, right? The funny thing about her is that one time she came in, she ordered the drink through my manager, and then he had one of us secretly make the drink for her, and then he grabbed the drink from us when we were finished, and then he handed it off to her, and then she took a sip and was like, perfect, you always make it perfect. We did that so many times with her just to see how much of her taste is actually accurate and real versus like it all being psychological. And it's all psychological. Every barista has secretly made her drink behind her back and then she okayed it just because a manager passed it off to her. Whereas if one of us who made her drink passed it off to her ourselves, she would be like, oh, this tastes horrible. I need the manager to fix it. Only managers can make my drink.
Riddle me this.
I laughed at that TikTok for so long. But yeah, those are some of my experiences working as a waitress and not knowing that I was autistic at the time. All in all, I feel like I learned a lot of really important social lessons while I was working in the food industry in general. I learned how to talk to all different types of people. It honestly really helped me to learn how to socialize with people with the comfort of a script of a job. But it's still really difficult, if anything, to navigate interpersonal relationships with coworkers and that whole thing at jobs. I feel like that's a code that I still have not cracked and probably will never understand or crack. And it's something that I think really intensely affects autistic folks of all ages out there. Having to expend all of our spoons just to socialize with coworkers and interpret those invisible contracts and figure out ways to play into it to ultimately fail, like that should not be where we're expending our energy. Like, it should not. And we shouldn't feel the need to have to do that, or else it'll affect our job and our position at the job and things like that. I'd be curious to know how many of my viewers are people that work in the food industry or have worked in the food industry. What are some of those important lessons that you've learned through that experience? Let me know in the comment section down below. But other than that, make sure you guys subscribe and like this video. That really helps my channel out in being able to reach other people out there. Thank you guys for tuning in on today's video. Make sure you take some time to regulate yourselves, and I will see you next week. Bye.